Spring in Montana always arrived reluctantly. The April wind sweeping through Pine Ridge still carried the lingering chill of winter's tale. The unpaved, muddy path leading to the church, softened by the previous night's rain, was now imprinted with a chaotic mess of footprints and wagon ruts. Most of these tracks belonged to the town's so-called respectable folk. They had not come to offer blessings, but to witness what they considered a doomed spectacle. The central figures in this spectacle were the town's two acknowledged, pitiable souls, Sarah Brennan and Daniel Hart. Sarah had once been the brightest student at the town's school, fluent in reciting poetry and solving complex arithmetic that baffled others. But fate had not been kind. Her father, a miner, had perished in a cave-in when she was 12. Her mother, consumed by grief and illness, followed him 3 years later. Since then, Sarah had lived with her aunt's family, her status hovering somewhere between a poor relation and an unpaid servant. Her once vibrant spirit had been worn down by years of drudgery and whispered pity. At 23, she was considered well past a marriageable age, destined for spinsterhood. Daniel was the quiet foreman of the sprawling, mysterious Silver Pine Ranch on the outskirts of town. He was a man of few words, his face etched with lines that spoke more of sun and wind than of laughter. His clothes were simple, his hands calloused and perpetually stained with soil. He owned nothing but his horse, his saddle, and his reputation for being fiercely honest and impossibly hard-working. To the townsfolk, he was just another laborer, a man with no prospects beyond his weekly wage. Their courtship, if it could even be called that, had been a quiet observance with scorn. People saw Sarah in her faded, darned dress walking beside Daniel on the dusty road after Sunday service. They saw him tipping his worn hat to her, saw her offering him a small, genuine smile, a sight so rare it confused them. The rumor mill churned. Poor, desperate Sarah had settled for the only man who would have her, a man with nothing to offer but a life of toil. The laughter began as a low murmur at the back of the church. Mrs. Eliza Harrington, the banker's wife, leaned over to her friend, her voice a carrying whisper meant to be heard. "Well, she's secured herself a future, hasn't she? A future of mending fences and counting cattle. How pastoral." A chuckle rippled through her pew. Young Tommy Jenkins snickered, "Bet the wedding feast is hardtack and beans." His mother swatted his arm half-heartedly, her own lips twitching. Sarah stood at the altar, her hand trembling slightly in Daniel's steady, rough grip. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, not new but clean and carefully pressed. She heard the whispers, felt the weight of their mocking gazes like a physical pressure. Her cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. She looked not at the congregation, but into Daniel's eyes. In their gray depths, she saw no pity, no mockery, only a quiet, unwavering certainty and a tenderness that took her breath away. He gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. The preacher's words about for richer or for poorer seemed to hang in the air, charged with ironic meaning. When he pronounced them man and wife, the applause was sparse and perfunctory. Outside, as they prepared to leave in Daniel's modest wagon, the well-wishes were laced with barbs. "Best of luck, you two," said Mr. Gable, the mercantile owner, his tone implying they would need every ounce of it. "Do write if you need anything, dear," said Mrs. Harrington to Sarah, her smile thin. "Though I suppose you'll be rather busy." Daniel helped Sarah into the wagon, his touch firm and gentle. He ignored the comments entirely, as if they were nothing more than the buzzing of distant flies. As the wheels began to turn, slicing through the mud, Sarah dared a glance back. The crowd was already dispersing, their laughter fading into the crisp air, their curiosity satisfied. They were leaving, she realized, to return to their warm houses and full tables, to gossip about the foolish Brennan girl who had sealed her own fate. She turned to face the road ahead, leading out of town and towards the foothills where the Silver Pine Ranch lay. A strange calm settled over her. The worst was over. The public humiliation was done. Now there was only the unknown future and the silent, steadfast man beside her. "You all right?" Daniel's voice was low, barely louder than the creak of the wagon.
Sarah took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. "Yes," she said, and for the first time that day, she meant it. "I am." They rode in companionable silence, the sounds of the town giving way to the rustle of wind in the tall grasses and the distant cry of a hawk. The sprawling ranch house, when it came into view, was not the grand mansion some might have imagined for a property of its size. It was a large, solid log structure, weathered but impeccably maintained, with a wide porch that looked out over endless pastures and the purple-hued mountains beyond. An elderly Chinese man, Lin, came out to greet them, his face breaking into a warm smile that reached his eyes. He was the ranch's cook, and, as Sarah would later learn, Daniel's closest confidant. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hart," Lin said, his voice kind. The title, so new and unfamiliar, sent a shiver through Sarah. Mrs. Hart. Home. Inside, the house was spacious and clean, simply but solidly furnished. It felt lived in and warm, not a showpiece. Daniel showed her a room that was clearly meant to be hers. A quilt in a pattern of blue and white stars covered the bed, and a small vase of wildflowers sat on the dresser. "I hope it's all right," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. Lin helped. "It's perfect," she whispered, her throat tight. It was the first space that had ever felt truly, unquestionably hers. That first week was a period of adjustment and discovery. Sarah learned the rhythms of the ranch. She learned that Daniel rose before dawn, his movements quiet so as not to disturb her. She learned to cook alongside Lin, who taught her recipes far beyond the simple fare she was used to. She learned that the ranch hands, rough men who spoke little in town, treated Daniel with a respect bordering on reverence and greeted her with a sincere, "Mornin', ma'am." And she learned about her husband. He was a man of deep, quiet observation. He could read the weather in the clouds, know a horse's temperament by the look in its eye, and sense when a calf was ailing before any sign was visible. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were considered and true. He was not a man of grand gestures, but of consistent, quiet care. He ensured her woodbox was always full, brought her a book of poetry he'd ordered from the city after noticing her gazing at his small shelf, and would simply sit with her on the porch in the evenings, the silence between them comfortable and full. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Sarah gathered her courage. The memory of the town's laughter still stung. "Daniel," she began, mending a tear in his work shirt by lamplight, "the people in town, what they said, does it ever bother you?" He looked up from the harness he was oiling, his expression thoughtful. He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice even softer than usual, "a man's worth isn't measured by the talk in a mercantile. It's measured by the land he tends, the animals he cares for, the promises he keeps." He met her gaze. "I made a promise to you. That's the only measure that matters to me." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. For the first time she understood that she had not married a simple poor man. She had married a man of profound, unshakable integrity. The laughter of Pine Ridge seemed smaller and farther away than ever. Meanwhile, life in Pine Ridge continued. Sarah's name came up occasionally, a subject of morbid curiosity. "Seen that Brennan girl lately?" someone would ask. "Hardly at all," would be the reply. "Stuck out there on that ranch, I suppose, probably too ashamed to show her face." The speculation was always tinged with a smug certainty. They were waiting, it seemed, for the inevitable failure, for Sarah to come trudging back to town, worn out and broken, confirming their every prediction. But Sarah was not breaking. She was blooming. Freed from the constant judgment and the soul-crushing dependency of her aunt's house, she discovered reserves of strength she never knew she had. She took charge of the ranch's ledgers, finding errors that even the previous foreman had missed. She started a small vegetable garden behind the house. She began visiting the line cabins with Daniel, bringing medicines and treats to the isolated hands. She was no longer the pitied Sarah Brennan. She was becoming Sarah Hart, a capable woman who was The transformation was internal at first, but soon it began to show. There was a new light in her eyes, a straightness in her posture.
Her clothes, though still simple, were clean and well-fitted. When she did come to town for supplies every few weeks, she did so with a quiet dignity. She greeted people politely but distantly, no longer shrinking under their gaze. She spoke to Mr. Gable about the ranch's account with a firm clarity that left him flustered. She no longer looked like a woman defeated by life. She looked like a woman who had found her place in it. This change did not go unnoticed, and it bred not admiration, but confusion and a strange, simmering resentment. Her happiness was an affront to their narrative. Mrs. Harrington remarked to her sewing circle, "It's quite unnatural, that level of contentment in such circumstance. Perhaps the poor thing has simply lost her wits." The stage was set. The town clung to its pity and scorn, while on the Silver Pine Ranch a quiet, powerful love was growing, rooted in mutual respect. And a secret, vast as the Montana sky itself, lay just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment that would shatter Pine Ridge's small certainties forever. Chapter 2. The Storm and the Secret. The secret arrived not with fanfare, but with a late summer storm of biblical proportions. For 3 days the sky over the Pine Ridge Valley hung low and leaden. On the 4th morning it finally broke. Rain fell not in drops, but in relentless wind-driven sheets, turning the earth to soup and the creeks into roaring, coffee-colored torrents. Thunder shook the very timbers of the ranch house. Daniel had been tense for days, reading the signs in the restless cattle and the oppressive air. When the storm hit its peak at noon, he pulled on his slicker, his face grim. "The river's going to jump its banks near the south pasture," he said to Sarah, shouting over the wind. "I have to move the herd from the lower ground. Lynn's at the bunkhouse. Stay inside." "Daniel, it's too dangerous," Sarah cried, clutching his arm. He placed a rain-chilled hand over hers, full of that same steady certainty, before he turned and vanished into the gray wall of water. Hours crawled by. Sarah paced the main room, jumping at every crack of thunder. Lynn came from the bunkhouse, his usually serene face lined with worry. "The river is rising very fast," he said, staring out the window at the blurred landscape. Just as the gloom of early evening began to deepen, the sound of frantic hoofbeats splashed into the yard. It was Jake, one of the youngest hands, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. "Ma'am," he gasped, sliding from the saddle, "it's the boss. The bridge on the old mill road gave way. His horse spooked, threw him. He's hurt bad. Leg may be broken. We got him to the line shack at 3 Forks, but the creek's cut us off. Can't get him back here, and he's feverish." Sarah's heart turned to ice, but her mind, to her own surprise, became preternaturally clear. This was the crisis the town had always believed would break her. She felt no panic, only a surge of fierce, protective resolve. "Lynn," she said, her voice not shaking, "pack every medicine we have. Bandages, whiskey, the bone-setting kit, blankets, food." She turned to Jake. "Saddle my mare and the sturdiest pack mule. We're going." "Ma'am, you can't," Jake protested. "The trails are waterfalls. The fords are 10 feet deep." "I am not leaving my husband in a shack with a broken leg," Sarah stated, her tone brooking no argument. It was a voice neither Jake nor Lynn had heard from her before, the voice of command. "We go up through the high pass. It's longer, but it's on rock, not mud. Now move." They moved. Within 20 minutes they were mounted, their gear wrapped in oilskin. Sarah led the way, her head bowed against the stinging rain, her body bent low over her mare's neck. The trail was a slick, treacherous scramble over lichen-slicked rock. Lightning illuminated the world in terrifying flashes of white, revealing dizzying drops to their left. The wind tried to tear them from their saddles. She thought of nothing but the next her fall, the next few feet of safety. She thought of Daniel's steady hand, his quiet strength. He had built a fortress of dignity for her. Now she would fight through hell itself to bring him home. It took 4 agonizing hours to cover a distance that normally took 1. When they finally slithered down the slope to the small, stout line shack at 3 Forks, Sarah was numb with cold and exhaustion. She pushed the door open. Daniel lay on a crude bunk by the fire, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His right leg was crudely splinted with saddle straps and branches.
One of the older hands, Clem, was wiping his brow. "Sarah?" Daniel murmured, his eyes fluttering open, glazed with pain and fever. "You shouldn't. Storm." "Hush," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. She knelt beside him, her wet clothes forgotten. Her hands, which had been trembling on the reins, were now steady as she felt his burning forehead, then examined the splint. The break was clean but swollen. Working with Lynn, she cleaned the skin, reset the bone with a firm, sure touch that made Daniel groan through clenched teeth, and bound it properly with the supplies they'd brought. She forced willow bark tea past his lips for the fever, cleaned a deep gash on his temple, and wrapped him in dry blankets. For 2 days they were trapped. Sarah barely slept, nursing Daniel as his fever raged and broke. She changed his dressings, kept him hydrated, talked to him softly about the ranch, about the garden, about nothing at all, just to keep him anchored to the world. Clem and Jake watched her, their initial pity for the city woman replaced by awed respect. On the 3rd day, the rain ceased. The sun emerged, brilliant and cleansing. Daniel's fever was gone, his color returning. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. He watched Sarah as she moved around the small cabin, preparing broth. "You came through that," he said, his voice rough. "Of course I did," she replied, simply, meeting his gaze. He reached for her hand. "I always knew you were strong, Sarah Hart, but today I saw the steel." The journey back to the main house was slow and careful. News of the accident and Sarah's daring rescue had already trickled back to the ranch and, via a talkative stable boy, into Pine Ridge. The story grew in the telling. Sarah Hart had ridden through a lightning storm up the Devil's Own Pass to save her husband. The town didn't know what to make of it. It didn't fit the script. Their mockery began to feel hollow, tinged with an uneasy shame. Daniel's recovery was slow. Confined to a chair on the porch, he grew quieter, more introspective. He watched Sarah run the ranch with a capable hand, delegating tasks to the hands, managing the books, making decisions. His pride in her was palpable. One evening, about a month after the storm, with his leg propped and the first stars piercing the deep velvet of the sky, he broke a silence that had stretched through supper. "Sarah," he began, his voice unusually heavy, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you long before I asked you to marry me." Sarah put down her darning, her heart suddenly pounding. She had always sensed a depth to Daniel, a past he never discussed. "You can tell me anything." He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the distant dark silhouette of the mountains. "My name isn't just Daniel Hart. It's Daniel James Hawthorne Hart." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the gravity with which he said it held her still. "My father," he continued, "was Silas Hawthorne Hart." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the gravity with which she said it held her still. "My father," he continued, "was Silas Hawthorne." This time Sarah gasped. Everyone knew the name Silas Hawthorne. He was a legend, a recluse, the fabulously wealthy owner of the Hawthorne Mining Consortium and countless acres of land across the territory. A man spoken of in whispers, a ghost of immense power and mystery who had died nearly a year ago. His estate, they said, was still being untangled by lawyers from back east. "He was a hard man," Daniel said, the words coming slowly, painfully. "Brilliant, driven, and cruel in his pursuit of wealth. My mother was the daughter of one of his foremen. He took what he wanted and had no use for us once I was born. He provided money, sent me to a good school back east, but only to avoid scandal. He never acknowledged me publicly. My mother died young, heartbroken." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I hated his world, his money, the way it twisted people. When I finished school, I came back out here, took my mother's maiden name, Hart, and decided to make my own way. I wanted nothing from him. I worked my way up from a stable hand. The owner of Silver Pine, an old friend of my mother's, knew who I was but kept my secret. When he retired, he made me foreman." Sarah listened, stunned. The quiet foreman, the man with calloused hands, was the heir to the largest fortune in Montana. "The lawyers found me after he died," Daniel went on. "For months they've been writing, sending telegrams. The estate is settled. I am Silas Hawthorne's sole heir. All of it. The mines, the land holdings, the shares, this ranch. It's all mine. I've been trying to decide what to do. I never wanted it." He looked at Sarah, his eyes searching hers for disgust, for greed, for the change he feared. "I married you as a poor man, Sarah. I fell in love with the woman who saw me, not a fortune. This changes everything, and it changes nothing. I am still the man you married, but the world won't see it that way." Sarah sat in silence, processing the enormity of it. The laughter of the town, their pity for her, poor choice, roared back into her memory with a new, ironic force. They had laughed at her for marrying a pauper, when in truth she had married a prince in workman's clothes. She stood up and walked to him, kneeling beside his chair. She took his weathered, strong hands in hers. "Daniel," she said, her voice firm and clear, "you told me a man's worth is measured by the land he tends, the animals he cares for, the promises he keeps. You have tended this land with love. You care for every living thing on it, and you have kept your promise to me every single day." She looked deep into his eyes. "The money, the land, it's just more earth and more paper. You are my fortune. This secret doesn't change who you are. It just gives us different tools." A weight seemed to lift from Daniel's shoulders. He brought her hand. A slow, determined smile spread across Sarah's face. It was not a smile of triumph, but of purpose. "We do what we have always done. We live honestly, we work hard, and we use what we have," she said, "for good." The hidden fortune was no longer hidden, and Sarah Hart, the woman everyone had pitied, now held the future of Pine Ridge in her hands, not with a clenched fist of vengeance, but with an open heart and a clear, steady vision. The real story was just beginning. The news broke in Pine Ridge like a dam giving way. It started with a rumor from the telegraph operator who had received a series of urgent, expensive wires addressed to Daniel J. Hawthorne Hart, Esquire, care of Silver Pine Ranch. Then, a stern-faced lawyer from Philadelphia named Mr. Thaddeus Clark arrived on the stagecoach, asking for directions to the Hawthorne estate. "Hawthorne?" Mr. Gable had sputtered from behind his mercantile counter. "There's no Hawthorne here, sir. You must be mistaken." "I assure you I am not," Mr. Clark replied, adjusting his spectacles. "My client, Mr. Daniel James Hawthorne Hart, is the legal owner of the Silver Pine Ranch and the principal heir to the Hawthorne Trusts. I am here to finalize the transfer of all assets into his direct control." The mercantile fell silent. The few customers within earshot stood frozen. The name Hawthorne echoed in the small space with the force of a thunderclap. Within an hour, it was all over town. Daniel Hart was Silas Hawthorne's son. Sarah was the mistress of a fortune. The collective gasp of Pine Ridge was almost audible. Disbelief curdled into a sickening, dawning horror. Every sneer, every laugh, every barbed well-wishing was remembered in exquisite, painful detail. Mrs. Harrington reportedly dropped her china teacup, the shattering sound a perfect echo of her social certainty. The women who had pitied Sarah now faced the terrifying prospect that she was the wealthiest person for 100 miles. The men who had mocked Daniel now realized they had insulted the most powerful landowner in the territory. A feverish, hypocritical energy gripped the town. The very next Sunday, the road to the Silver Pine Ranch saw more traffic than on a market day. Carriages and carts carrying families in their Sunday best jostled for space. They came bearing gifts, jars of preserves, loaves of bread, awkwardly offered congratulations. Sarah received them on the porch, with Daniel sitting silently beside her, his broken leg propped up. She wore a simple calico dress, her hands dusted with flour from the morning's baking. She was the picture of the ranch wife they had always derided, but now every detail was scrutinized for hidden meaning. "Mrs. Hart, what a delightful surprise," Mrs. Harrington trilled, her smile so wide it looked painful. "We simply had to come and offer our most sincere felicitations. To think, all this time we had royalty in our midst." Sarah accepted the jar of pickles Mrs. Harrington thrust at her. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. That's very kind. But we're not royalty. We're the same people we were last week." Her calm, even tone was more unnerving than haughtiness would have been. The visitors shifted uncomfortably. They tried to engage Daniel, who answered in monosyllables, his gaze distant, fixed on the pastures. It was clear. There would be no fawning acceptance here, no easy absolution. The true reckoning began in practical matters. Mr. Gable arrived, wringing his hat in his hands to discuss the ranch's account. For years he had overcharged the simple foreman, adding padded fees for delivery and inferior goods. "Mr. Gable," Sarah said, her ledger open before her. She pointed to a column of figures. "This charge for molasses last winter is triple the posted price. And these nails? We received common iron but were billed for hardened steel. I've tallied the discrepancies for the past 3 years. It comes to a significant sum." Mr. Gable turned pale. "A mistake, I assure you, Mrs. Hart. A clerical error." "Then you'll have the corrected bill and a refund ready by the end of the week," Sarah said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "And we will be taking our future business to the new supplier in Millansburg. Good day." Next was the bank. Old Mr. Harrington, portly and pompous, came to offer his services managing the vast Hawthorne wealth. "Mr. Harrington," Daniel said, speaking for the first time in such a meeting. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of the mountains. "My father's lawyers have recommended the First Territorial Bank in Helena. Their rates are better. We'll be transferring all assets." Harrington sputtered about local loyalty. Daniel merely looked at him. The man who laughed at his wedding remembered that gaze and fell silent. Sarah did not seek revenge, but she instituted a quiet, firm justice. She and Daniel used their new power not to crush, but to build, and in building they exposed the town's old, rotten foundations. Their first major decision was regarding the ranch itself. Daniel had no love for his father's mining operations, which had scarred the land and exploited men. "We'll sell the mines," Daniel told Sarah and Mr. Clark. "Sell every last one. Take the capital and put it into the land, not just this ranch, but all the Hawthorne holdings. We'll raise cattle, breed horses, practice careful grazing. We'll provide jobs that don't bury men underground." Then Sarah presented her idea. "The old Griggs place, the one that borders the schoolhouse. It's been empty for years. We'll buy it. Not to build a mansion." Her eyes shone with a vision. "We'll build a library, a free library for the town, and a meeting hall upstairs. A place for people to learn, for women to gather, for children to read stories that aren't just about survival."
Mr. Clark was astonished. "A philanthropic venture? A most noble use of capital, Mrs. Hart." "It's not philanthropy," Sarah corrected softly. "It's an investment in people." The announcement, when it came, sent a new shockwave through Pine Ridge. A library? A meeting hall for women? It was incomprehensible to many. But to others, the quiet, bookish children, the women stifled by endless chores and gossip, it was a beacon. The groundbreaking ceremony was a tense affair. The town council, falling over themselves to appear supportive, attended. The same people who had mocked Sarah now stood applauding her vision. She stood before them, not in silks from Paris, but in a well-made wool dress, her hair in a simple chignon. "True worth," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air, "is not inherited. It is built. It is built with hands that work, with minds that learn, and with hearts that choose compassion over cruelty. This building is for anyone who wants to build their own worth." As she spoke, she made eye contact with Mrs. Harrington, who looked away, flushed. She saw Tommy Jenkins, now an awkward teenager, listening intently. She saw the weary face of the schoolmarm, Miss Adams, light up with hope. The construction provided steady, well-paid work. Sarah insisted on hiring not just the usual crews, but also men who had been down on their luck, and even a few women who were skilled seamstresses to make curtains and cushions. The project became a living lesson in the new order the Harts were creating. One afternoon, a timid knock came at the ranch house door. It was Mary Ann, the daughter of the town's drunkard blacksmith. She was perhaps 15, skinny, with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Mrs. Hart," she whispered, I heard about the library. I like to read. I mend clothes for people, and I've saved a little. Would it be enough to borrow books?" Sarah's heart ached. She saw herself in this girl, the hunger for something more, the shame of poverty. "Mary Ann," Sarah said, opening the door wide, "come in. The library will be free for everyone, but it needs someone to help organize the books when they arrive from the catalogs, someone who loves them. Would you like to be our first librarian's assistant? It pays a wage." The girl's eyes filled with tears, not of pity, but of stunned, luminous hope. "Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes!" That moment, Sarah knew they were on the right path. They were not just building a library, they were building ladders for others to climb. The final, most profound change was within their marriage. The secret was gone, and with it the last shadow between them. Their love, forged in simplicity and tested by storm and revelation, deepened into an unshakable partnership. Daniel, freed from the burden of his past, embraced his role not as a tycoon, but as a steward. He consulted Sarah on every major decision. Together they walked their land, planning irrigation, selecting breeding stock, dreaming of the future.
One evening, as they oversaw the planting of an apple orchard on a south-facing slope, Daniel took her hand. "My father spent his life digging wealth out of the ground, leaving holes behind," he said. "We're planting ours, putting roots in." Sarah squeezed his hand, looking at the neat rows of young trees, their branches like hopeful arms reaching for the sky. "The strongest legacy isn't a hole in the earth, Daniel. It's something that grows." Pine Ridge would never be the same. The laughter had died, replaced by a complex mixture of awe, gratitude, and lingering shame for some. The Hart name was no longer a synonym for poverty, but for a quiet, transformative power. Sarah, the woman they had laughed at, had not sought to become their queen. Instead, she had become their architect, patiently, compassionately, helping them build a better town than they deserved. And in doing so, she and Daniel had found a wealth no fortune could ever buy, a life of purpose, built together on a foundation of unshakable love and hard-won dignity. Their story was no longer about a hidden fortune, but about a visible, growing testament to the idea that the richest soil in which to plant a future is a heart that has known both humility and